Have you guys ever tried audiobooks? I found over the past decade or so, I've been listening more and more to books in that format. It's convenient to be able to have your hands free to work on a knitting project or something around the house. But it's something I had to kind of like learn to do. I still like a traditional book where I can read and stop and think about things that I've read. And I found when I first started listening to audiobooks, I would think about what the book was talking about, and then I would miss, like 15 seconds of the book and I'd have to rewind. So it was a little bit of a learning process, but now that I'm used to audiobooks, it's really nice to have that option available. So today we're going to talk about some of my favorite audiobooks and narrators to get you started if you want to try a new format.
The genius of apartheid was convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. Apartheid is what it was. You separate people into groups and make them hate one another so you can run them all.
Let's see. So the first one I wanted to talk about today was Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. He narrates the book himself. I'm not always a fan of authors narrating their own books, probably more so in fiction. When it's nonfiction, they're telling their own story, and I think it's very powerful. So Trevor, his book is recounting his coming of age in apartheid South Africa with his father, who was a white Swiss man, and his mother, who was black Xhosa, I believe is how you say that, all through his young adulthood into when he starts The Daily Show. So Trevor is a natural storyteller. Anyone who watches his show and has seen the behind-the-scene clips that he shares, where he kind of just talks freely with his audience members, knows that he is really good at storytelling. And he just has this effortless style when he's telling his stories. And even though there's a lot of serious parts of the book, there's a lot of humor in it too.
The hostess races for the hall closet and signals to the maid. "Do be a darling and get that down for me." The maid retrieves the board with a shake of her head. "You oughtn't to be messin' with this board, miss." "Don't be silly. That's primitive." With a zippy twirl worthy of Clara Bow, the hostess bursts into the formal living room holding the Ouija board. "Who wants to commune with the spirits?"
I was looking at my list here. So January Lavoie narrates the Diviner series by Librarian. It's a young adult historical fiction, I would say like a thriller with paranormal ties in it. It's set in the 1920s New York, and the book follows a ragtag group of young adults who have these unusual abilities. So there's an object reader, a fire starter, a dream walker, somebody who has elements of invisibility. And this is kind of where all of their stories merge, and they come together to try and catch a serial killer that is supernatural. There's some interesting elements going on here. So Libba Bray does a really great job with historical fiction. It's very well researched, and there's a lot of really fun American historical events that she incorporates throughout the series. It's one of my favorite things about the book, that the setting really comes alive. And the narrator, Lavoie, not only does she do a superb job bringing all of these diverse characters together, but she brings the atmosphere of the 20s alive. It's phenomenal. There's parts where there's like jazz going on and they're in a jazz club, and she, goes from that to having, different ethnicities and I'll just read part of an audiobook review about her performance. And they're talking about how immigrant voices that drip with Irish, Polish, and Russian accents, flappers exude sass with their sultry rasps, and the gravelly tones of preachers and musicians reverberate through Harlem. Her portrayal of the murderer is so macabre that it's best to listen with the lights on. I actually know somebody who was listening to this audiobook and they had to stop because it was too creepy at the beginning. And it's not really I guess it is a creepy book, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to this one at night, because Lavoie and Bray do such a great job with that atmosphere. Highly recommend that one. I'm actually reading the final and fourth book in that series. The other good thing about the narrating, or the audiobook format of that is they are longer books too. And obviously if you listen, it's going to take a while to get through. But they're like most of her books are like 600 pages to get through, but the narration is wonderful.
It was a ridiculous sequence of events that led me to almost dying, and an even more ridiculous sequence that led me to surviving. The mission is designed to handle sandstorm gusts up to 150 kilometers per hour, so Houston got understandably nervous when we got whacked with 175 kilometers per hour winds.
The next on my list is R.C. Bray. No relation, I don't believe, to Libba. And he narrates The Martian by Andy Weir. And so that one, if you haven't heard about that one, is about astronaut botanist Mark Watney. Yeah, Watney. And he gets stuck on Mars alone. So there's an incident that happens and he gets left there on accident. He has to use his engineering ability to try and stay alive as long as possible. And so the course of the book is basically video diaries of him just keeping track of what he's doing and how he's trying to use science to figure out all of these problems that arise to keep himself alive as long as possible. So it's a sci-fi thriller. It's really well researched. I remember reading an article about it when it came out, and scientists at NASA were saying, like, pretty much everything is spot on science-wise in the book. There's one small detail that wouldn't probably have happened that way, but they were just really impressed with his scientific know-how. So there is obviously science and some math and stuff in there, and it's one of those things that, you know, if you're reading in the book, you might graze over that part, but the narration kind of helps you get through that, and it's really interesting. You get to have a lot of character development because he's just kind of, you know, he has no human interaction. He has no way to communicate with anyone on Earth. So, like, this is his only communication. You know, you see his humor, even though there's a lot going on. And it's just a really interesting book. So one thing for me is that he did so well with the character of Mark Watney. Like, he was Mark Watney. And when the film came out and we went to go see it, I was actually concerned that I wouldn't like it as much because I wouldn't, you know, I didn't know if Matt Damon was going to do it justice. And I was a little worried that in my mind that this narrator was always going to be Mark Watney, and I would just watch the film like, oh, that's not quite how the portrayal of the audiobook was, but they're both really great. And in this instance, I would recommend reading the book before the film. Slightly different endings, but both are great. So check both of those out.
When the final bulb pops alight and the smoke and sparks dissipate, it is finally legible, this elaborate incandescent sign. Leaning to your left to gain a better view, you can see that it reads, Le Cercle des Rêves.
Okay, so this next one, the Harry Potter series, I don't really think those need much of an introduction. Jim Dale narrates those, and he also narrates The Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern. So if Morgenstein, excuse me. If you wanted more of an adult book instead of a children's book. I read The Night Circus, but I didn't listen to it, so I haven't actually heard his narration for that. So he's obviously best known for bringing Harry Potter series to life, voicing hundreds of characters over the course of the series, and he actually held the Guinness World Record for the most number of diverse voices in an audiobook narration, and that was for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So it was 134 different characters. And the current world record holder for that is Robert Foss for John Steinbeck's The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights. It's a retelling of the Arthurian legends. But for quite a while, he held that world record.
Ahem. Yemi clears her throat at the front of the ahere. A not-so-subtle reminder that she's already passed this test. She smirks at us as she twirls her hand-carved staff, eager to see which one of us she gets to defeat in our graduation match.
So my last recommendation is for a narrator rather than a book or a series. Bonnie Turpin is my favorite narrator of all time. So all of the narrators on this list are award-winning narrators, specifically for these books, but also for additional books. But I specifically seek out audiobooks that Bonnie reads. It's the first time I've actually followed a narrator versus following, if you find an author you really like, you kind of go and you'll read their whole repertoire of work. And I kind of do that with Bonnie Turpin because I think she is so fantastic at what she does. Her performances are just fantastic. A lot of times when you're listening to an audiobook, you're aware that you're listening to the audiobook, obviously. And for hers, I just feel like drawn into the book. And you really just get into it, and you care about the characters, and obviously like part of that is the plot of the book and everything, but her performances they just transport you into the story. I think she does a phenomenal job. So here is a short list of some of her award-winning books that she's worked on. She has Children of Blood and Bone series written by Tomi Adeyemi, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which was also turned into a movie. Dread Nation, which is a supernatural historical fiction book by Justina Ireland. The Yellow House by Sarah M. Broom, which is a nonfiction book. And The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which is nonfiction and was on Oprah's book list. So I recommend out of those starting with The Children of Blood and Bone, because the book is fantastic to begin with, and her narration just kind of bumps it up even higher for me. So it's a West African-inspired book where the main character, Zele, is somebody who's trying to bring magic back to her land of Orisha. And it's just really interesting because you have three main characters, and she does the voices for all three, and they're pretty distinctive voices for each character. But then on top of that, the magical characters in this book speak a different language, and it's kind of this chanting, almost like musical poetry type of feel. And you wouldn't get that just from reading the book. So there are elements that are elevated through the narration, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's a good series. There's 2 books out so far in that series. I'm assuming there's going to be several more. So we'll start with those. I do have links in the description of sample clips from all of these audiobooks. You can find them if you go to audiophile.com, they have free book reviews on audiobooks there that talk about not only the book and the plot, but the narrator and how their performance is. It also will list if they are an award winner, if that matters to you. Some people like to start there. But they also have short clips for you to listen to there. And if you don't want to read book reviews of audiobooks to get started, you can also just go to Overdrive or the Libby app through the library, where you can get free audiobooks there. And before you check it out or put it on hold, it will also have a thing that will say like free sample, or you can listen to part of it there. And then if you are an Audible user, they have free samples there too. So you can get an idea of the narrator, because in audiobooks, the narrator can kind of make or break a book for you. I've actually found in some cases where I picked up a book and I was having a hard time getting past the first chapter. I had heard great things about it. I just couldn't get past it. And I was like, maybe I'll give the audiobook a try. And I ended up having that be one of my favorite book series ever. It was, I don't know, I just couldn't get past that first chapter, but their narration was really great. And I love stories, obviously. I love books, but I love storytelling, and kids love to be read to, and I don't think we ever really grow out of that once we become adults. And that's kind of what I think about. It's another form of entertainment. Somebody is performing this book for you, and it just kind of brings things to life. So I highly recommend trying audiobooks if you haven't before. If you try any of the books on this list, or if you've already read some of them or listened to them and really like them, or if you didn't like them, let me know what it was about them that you liked or didn't like in the comment below. I know a lot of us have really strong opinions of their format of reading. Some people, I'm still a traditionalist. I like to hold a book in my hand, but I kind of go back and forth between that and audiobooks. It's probably 50-50 for me at this point. So yeah, do you have a preference for your style of book? Let us know in the comments below. And then if you don't want to do digital audiobooks, we also have a really nice collection of books on CD at the library, so be sure to check that out. Thanks, guys. Bye.